Among the 12 disciples chosen by Jesus, Judas Iscariot remains one of the most controversial and enigmatic figures in the Christian tradition. His name became a symbol of betrayal, his action, a turning point in the gospel narrative. But who was Judas before the fateful act? What drove him to such a deed? Judas was not just a random follower. He was selected by Jesus himself, entrusted with the treasury of the group. This role implied a certain level of trust and responsibility. He was not a stranger, he was one of their own. The Gospels mention that Judas was a thief and helped himself to what was in the common purse. However, this assessment comes retrospectively, through the lens of betrayal. Before that, he acted like the others, listening to parables, witnessing miracles, and sharing meals with the teacher. Some researchers suggest that Judas had revolutionary views and believed that Jesus, as the Messiah, should take political power and lead the Jewish people to freedom. When this did not happen, frustration may have turned into disappointment, and then into betrayal. Judas' internal conflict likely deepened over time. He saw Jesus performing miracles, raising the dead, feeding thousands, yet he never sought political power. For many Jews of that era, the Messiah was supposed to be a liberator, a new David, a warrior king. But Jesus preached humility, peace, and spiritual transformation. It is possible that Judas, like others, initially believed in a different kind of Messiah. As time went on, this discrepancy between expectation and reality grew unbearable. According to the Gospel of John, Judas began to act deceitfully before the betrayal. Perhaps it was not a single moment, but a process of spiritual erosion. Frustration, envy, unmet ambitions, and the influence of external forces, all of this formed a dangerous cocktail inside a man who once had faith. It is also important to consider the environment. The Jewish elite, especially the high priests and Pharisees, saw Jesus as a threat. His popularity among the people, his criticism of religious hypocrisy, and his teachings about a new kingdom, all of this undermined their authority. Judas may have felt caught between two worlds. The turning point came during Jesus' final week in Jerusalem. The Gospels describe how Judas went to the chief priests and offered to betray Jesus. They were delighted and promised him 30 pieces of silver, the price of a slave in ancient times. This act did not appear spontaneous. Judas had time to think, to plan. He knew Jesus' habits, where he usually went to pray, when he would be alone. This knowledge became a weapon. Why 30 pieces of silver? Some interpret this as symbolic, referencing the prophecy in Zechariah about the rejected shepherd. Others see it as a humiliating price, indicating how little Judas truly valued his teacher. But the money itself may not have been the main motivation. Rather, it was a culmination of accumulated disappointment, a desire to provoke action, or a distorted hope that this betrayal would force Jesus to reveal his true power. In any case, Judas had made his choice. He handed over the Son of Man with a kiss. A gesture of love turned into a symbol of betrayal. On the night of the Last Supper, Jesus shared bread and wine with his disciples, knowing full well that one of them would betray him. "What you are about to do quickly," he said to Judas, who then left the room. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus prayed while the disciples slept. It was there, under the cover of night, that Judas appeared with a crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent by the high priests. He approached Jesus and kissed him, a prearranged sign to identify him in the darkness. "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" Jesus asked. At that moment, the betrayal became irreversible. Jesus was arrested, and the disciples scattered. The machinery of the trial and crucifixion was set in motion. Judas watched from the side. Perhaps he expected something different, that Jesus would fight back, that angels would descend, that a miracle would happen. But nothing of the sort occurred. The teacher whom he had followed for years went quietly to his death. The next morning, Judas experienced what may have been one of the most tragic psychological collapses in history. Realizing what he had done, he returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests. "I have sinned," he said. "I have betrayed innocent blood." But they answered, "What is that to us? That's your responsibility." The rejection of the money, once so desirable, now became a curse. Judas threw the coins into the temple and fled. Consumed by guilt, he hanged himself. His end was terrible, both physically and spiritually. The book of Acts offers a different version, saying that he fell headlong, his body burst open, and all his intestines spilled out. These two versions, hanging and falling, can be interpreted both literally and symbolically. One way or another, Judas' life ended in despair. His name became synonymous with treachery. But was he just a villain? Or a man broken by contradictions and unfulfilled hopes? Christian theology has long debated the role of Judas. Was he merely a pawn in the divine plan? Or did he have free will? The Gospels seem to suggest both. On the one hand, his betrayal was foretold by the prophets. On the other, he acted on his own accord. Church fathers offered different interpretations. Augustine saw Judas as an example of how God can use even evil for good. Others believe that Judas' fate was the price of freedom, the right to choose, even wrongly. There are apocryphal texts, such as the Gospel of Judas, which present him not as a traitor, but as a secret accomplice of Jesus. According to these writings, Jesus asked Judas to hand him over to fulfill the prophecy. This version offers a radically different perspective, one where Judas is not a villain, but a necessary participant in the divine drama. However, the canonical Gospels portray him as someone who lost his way, betrayed love, and paid for it with his life and soul. Judas' name has become a byword for betrayal in many languages. But is it fair to reduce a complex, tragic figure to a single word? His story is not only about treason, but also about human weakness, the danger of disappointment, and the price of choices. He loved, believed, hoped, and yet fell. His tragedy lies not only in the act of betrayal, but in the inability to find redemption afterward. Some theologians speculate, what if Judas had not hanged himself? What if he had waited until the resurrection and asked for forgiveness? Would Jesus have forgiven him? After all, Peter also betrayed, not by handing Jesus over, but by denying him 3 times. Yet he became the rock of the church. Judas did not wait. He judged himself harsher than anyone else. And that, perhaps, was his second mistake. The story of Judas is not just about one man. It is about each of us. About the crossroads we face, the temptations we encounter, and the consequences of our actions. In Judas, we see not only the traitor, but also the warning. Betrayal begins with disillusionment, grows through doubt, and ends in despair if there is no light left in the soul.